Joining our Zoom chat. I'll start my intro. I am Samantha from Bear Pond Books. I want to welcome you all, and I want to thank the Kellogg-Hubbard Library especially for hosting tonight on Zoom, and welcome you to our author talk virtually with Melanie Finn and Chera Hammons. A few housekeeping items. You will be muted upon arrival into Zoom. If you're not muted, please mute yourself. This will help keep down any background noises. We are recording tonight's reading. If you do not wish to be on camera for the recording, please turn off your video. The video will be shared on social media and websites and newsletters with the Kellogg-Hubbard Library and Bear Pond Book websites and newsletters. So tonight, we're excited to have this program. The authors, Melanie Finn and Chera Hammons, will each read briefly from their new novels. Melanie from The Hair. I have to remember to hold up the books. This is a gorgeous book. So here's The Hair, brand new, came out end of January with $2 radio. The Hair is what I'm calling a gorgeous but dark tale of survival, survivors, and a very strong woman. And Chera Hammons will read from her new book, Monarchs of the Northeast Kingdom, another very pretty book cover. And this is what I call a slow burning mystery with characters who will enrage and surprise you. Yeah, Chera, I didn't tell you yet, but I kept getting really mad at the choices Anna was making. I was like, why are you doing it that way? And reading the whole book, you see why it is really surprising. So both of these books are available at Bear Pond Books, and they are my staff pick. You see, this one has the sticker. The staff pick table will have both of these, and they're also available online. In the chat box, I will drop in the links for both of those books. You can order them online. We will ship anywhere in the US, or you can pick them up at the store. I'm excited to have Melanie and Chera together because both books are based in the woods of the Northeast Kingdom, and both authors write the setting so well that you can hear the sticks snap, you can feel the snow fall on your cheeks. And with Chera's book, she writes a lot about horses. You can even, feel the mane in your fingers and the wind on your face and ride along as Anna rides. They will both be in conversation tonight about writing and setting, and maybe even about saddle making, because I hear that one of the authors is curious to learn more about saddle making, which is featured heavily in Chera's book, The Monarchs of the Northeast Kingdom. Please put questions in the chat box. You're welcome. We will have a Q&A after the authors both read and discuss the books. So please do that chat box for your questions. Some quick author introductions. Melanie Finn is the author of 4 novels and was born and raised in Kenya and the US. The Gloaming was a New York Times Notable Book of 2016, a finalist for the Vermont Book Award, and was called The Guardian's Not the Booker Prize. She is the writer and producer of the Disney nature wildlife epic Crimson Wing, Mystery of the Flamingos, and is the co-founder and director of the Tanzanian-based charity Natron Healthcare. She and her family live on a remote hill in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. Chera Hammons holds an MFA from Goddard College in Plainfield, Vermont, and serves as writer in residence at West Texas A&M University. She is the author of 4 books of poetry, including the 2017 Southwest Book Award winner, The Traveler's Guide to Bomb City. She lives near Amarillo, Texas with her husband, 3 cats, 2 of which are on his lap right now, a dog, a rabbit, a donkey, and 5 horses. Please help me welcome Melanie Finn to start us off. Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. It's great to be here, and I think it's funny. I think Chera and I are going to have to tally up our animals to see who actually has more. And I'm pretty sure when I include my daughter's amphibians, I'm probably going to just edge her out. Okay, so I'm going to start with a reading from The Hair. So at this point in the book, you always have to pick a bit that isn't a spoiler. And so at this point in the book, my main character, Rosie, has she's hooked up with this very charismatic man, 20 years older than her, called Bennett. And she herself,
Uh-oh. Did we lose her? Did we lose our author?
It looks like we might have.
Oh, she's back. Hold on, but she's on mute.
unmute. Okay, all right. I'll try again. I don't know where I went. So Bennett, so Rosie Monroe, this very naive young woman who's grown up in Lowell, Massachusetts, she's also damaged by a very isolating childhood. There's also a threat of sexual abuse, and so she hooks up with Bennett, who's very glamorous and worldly. And initially, things go really well. He's very charming and worldly, and introduces her to high society in Connecticut. But as anybody who's even remotely has any kind of savvy at all recognizes that it's not going to go well for Rosie. We recognize the type that Bennett is. And so they abscond in the middle of the night with sirens, police sirens in the background. And he brings Rosie to this remote cabin in the Northeast Kingdom, which is unheated. There's only a stove, there's no phone, there's nothing. And he kind of comes and goes, and she doesn't have any money. But for her, because she's Rosie, and she rises to the challenge, and she actually becomes a much stronger person, a very resilient, powerful person because of this experience. So in this scene, Rosie is actually hunting. Climbing up to her stand, Rosie opened her thermos and drank the dark coffee. The warmth in her hands and throat was beautiful. Then she waited, a hibernation that was also a coiled preparation. Within her physical stillness, she listened and watched. The coming of a deer, the punch of narrow hooves on near frozen ground, or the flickering of an ear, a tail. At last, a young buck appeared, a second-year male. She was lucky, for last week she'd had only does. He slipped through the woods, his movements silken and spare. She tried to learn from the deer how to move without wasting precious energy, how to imagine the land beneath the undergrowth so she did not stumble, how to step over, under, threading with a sinewed continuity. The buck approached, tentatively, as if suspicious of anything so sweet as apples. He scented the air, but on this still morning he would find no trace of Rosie. The breeze carried her smell away from him. He flicked his glorious tail. He reached back and scratched his hind leg with his teeth. Rosie could see the boot polish wet of his nose, his dense eyelashes. She could almost hear his breath as he moved directly beneath her, his nose to the ground, his mouth open upon an apple. Billy had told her she shouldn't think about being slow or trying to move so incrementally that the deer wouldn't notice, because the deer would see the slightest movement. Such was their design, their eyes mounted on the sides of their skulls to see behind and above. Billy said she had to stop thinking about the gun and the movement altogether, to practice at home again and again until the motion was thoughtless. They see you thinking, Billy had said. They hear you thinking. It's the thinking, the ruckus in your head, like a circus parade. The buck dropped. The sound of the shot continued around the hills, ringing the clear morning air, around and around like a bell. Jumping down from the hide, Rosie squatted to pee. The release of coffee and tension made the pissing intensely sensuous. From her low position, she admired the morning, the tones of cool blue and pale pink. Heavy frost still sheathed the startling cerise of the wild blackberry canes and the bright citron of the bunchgrass. The sharp tang of gun smoke prickled her nostrils. She felt ancient, as if she put her hand down on the earth, she might reach right through and grasp a cord that connected her directly to another hunter who had squatted here on similar terms on a similar morning centuries ago. Nothing felt this complete, not even Miranda in her arms. She was entirely happy. So that's what I'm going to read. And I'm going to hand over to Chera, who's sparkling spare prose I really admired so much.
Thank you. That's a hard excerpt to follow, and one of my favorites from your book, which I have right here. It's so gorgeous. Please go get this book. You won't be sorry. I want to thank Michelle, Samantha, and Melanie for putting this all together. And thank you all for being here. This is my book, Monarchs of the Northeast Kingdom, which I had the misfortune to publish in 2020. So I appreciate, since all of my tour things were canceled, I appreciate the opportunity to share it with you. I'm just going to read an excerpt starting at the very beginning. The first thing John says when he comes inside is that he has seen blood in the new snow. Blood. Anna muses over her coffee, not awake enough yet to feel alarm. Yes, beside the driveway. He hits the newspaper against his leg to get the ice off of the orange plastic wrapper. It's a habit Anna hates because it leaves cold, clear pools on the kitchen tile that seep even through her thick winter socks. Just a few drops, not a lot. Still. Blood. How stark it would look against the crystallized white, like rubies loosened from a ring and fallen into a white fur pelt. Where could it have come from? A deer, I think, John says. There were tracks going off into the trees. Oh, Anna says. Again? It looks like it. They didn't get a clean kill this time. John sits in one of the worn oak chairs and unfolds the paper. I'll take Charlie out later and try to find it. Why? What good will it do? She wants it to be spoken. Well, he clears his throat. It might be suffering. She nods. They can't allow anything to die slowly in the cold, bleeding to death. Not on their land. They're decent people. She asks, as she did the last time, should we call the game warden? He looks at her over the paper for a moment, thinking. Let's wait, he says. I want to make sure there's a good reason first. They are, after all, used to keeping their own counsel. Neither of them has any interest in hunting or knows anything of hunting laws, though they have read stories about these subjects in the Gazette and notice generally when hunting season falls. It hasn't started yet this year, but it will soon. Anna doesn't even know how to find the number for the game warden if she needs to call one. She assumes John knows, though he has never called one either. They eat in easy silence. Anna picks at her eggs and sips her coffee while John reads his paper. Every once in a while he frowns. He must be reading bad news, obituaries, politics, crime, fracking, reports of invasive species that could kill the trees. That's all the paper ever has in it besides births and weddings. Anna tries not to think of the blood. It's nice to watch John without his noticing. She studies his eyes, the pleasing wrinkles at their sides that mean he has laughed a lot. Nearly everything he does possesses an air of benign absent-mindedness that has only increased over time. He taps his foot as he reads. Anna can tell from the squeak that he has forgotten to take off his boots again. The snow will soon be melting onto the kitchen floor in dirty rings. She sighs. Still, staying annoyed with him is hard. He's easygoing and tends to take good care of her. She stands and begins to do the dishes while he finishes the paper. The window over the sink lets chilly air seep in that makes the metal faucet handle cold. The taps sputter at first. As she waits for the water to run hot, she looks at the naked maples and tall, thin evergreens at the edge of the yard. The snow has clumped on the needles, making them droop. The trees look heavy, gray, depressed. It's still only the middle of autumn, and it's been harder than most. The ground will be white and blank for months yet. The floor under her feet leaches cold, making her heels ache. She's glad there isn't much to wash. The soap bubbles burst in the sink in tiny rainbows. The almost translucent, spotted skin on her hands turns pink. The blue veins at the top spread like roots. As she dries her hands and slides her wedding ring back on, John stands and stretches, yawning wide and slow like a bear. Well, he says. Are you going out now? Anna asks. I guess I'd better, he says. Who knows how far it might have gone. He kisses her on the cheek. Be careful. Old Charlie hasn't thrown me yet, he says. She stands at the kitchen counter and listens to him rummage in the hall closet for the rifle. The rifle is only a second-hand .22 they purchased years ago, when they first bought their property, but it does well enough at close range. They both hate the gun and know nothing of killing, except that it should be both careful and quick. They had originally been driven to buy it for protection of their livestock from wildlife and dogs, and it comes out only in emergencies. Anna has never used the rifle and has seen John shoot it exactly 3 times. Once at a tree trunk to warn off a couple of coyotes that had been prowling near the chicken pen. Once to put down the Hanson's gelding, which had gotten loose and been struck by a car. She can sometimes still hear the horse screaming in her memory. She had called their own vet to ask where in the forehead to shoot it for a clean kill, shaking so badly she had misdialed several times. And once to kill a dog with distemper that someone had dumped off near their house. If you live out of town, you have to get used to some killing. That's the way of things, but that doesn't mean you have to like it.
I think it's ironic that like Rosie might be hunting the deer, although to be honest, I don't think that Rosie would miss. But I think it's so interesting that we both chose these particular pieces as setting, so particularly in the kingdom where, you know, hunting is so much a part of life. Like, I mean, I know it's hunting season because everybody in the supermarket starts wearing camo, like
right.
even the babies, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting juxtaposition there of the excerpts. And of course, your character goes hunting a lot and it's really important to her, and mine's doing the opposite thing and trying to protect her land from hunters who aren't supposed to be there. So
yeah, and in fact, there is a scene when Rosie and Billy actually illegally hunt a deer. And you know, one feels sympathy with them, which when of course in your book the opposite happens, that the poachers are really the bad guys. So but what I love about your writing, Chera, is the detail, the sparkling simplicity of it, like when you're talking about the faucet and the window opened a crack so that cold air comes in and, you know, makes the faucet cold. Like, I think that kind of attention to detail, it pulls one so into the moment of this real stillness in the kitchen where the story is unfolding. I just think it's wonderful. And I think that must be the poet in you.
Thank you. I think I would have to agree. I was not sure about switching from poetry to fiction for a while, but I was homebound with illness and I'd always wanted to try to write a novel, and I'm glad I did. And your prose has this quality of being, I felt when I was reading it, like it's beautiful and intense, and it was punching me in the gut the whole time. Like it's just so powerful. It has a power behind it that I found really engaging.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to know when to, you know, like when to pull back and focus more on the story. I definitely feel like I have the ability that if I let it go, I would just like go off into some kind of zone that I'm not sure anyone could follow me, and having to pull back to that story. So I'm really interested in how you decided, you know, you had been this poet and you decided to write fiction. And so how you set about A, making that decision, and B, the process of that, and what you found compellingly like really different between the two mediums.
Well, I have neurological issues, and there are like switches going off and on my brain all the time, and the poetry switch was off for a long time, and I was kind of freaking out because I didn't know if it would ever come back, and like, who am I if I can't do this thing that I've been doing since I was like 3 years old. But I found that prose was a way, it was more relaxed and looser. It didn't have to be so condensed. It had a different rhythm to it. Like it felt like this swinging kind of rhythm. And my brain was okay with that because I've started many novels in the past, and fiction was my first love, but I didn't have, I don't know, the brain power or the willpower, one or the other, to write something that long and stick with it. So I have a bunch of abandoned novels that were abandoned at like 12,000 words. And this was the first one I actually finished. And I don't think I was writing it to publish it because I knew it was weird. I was writing it to not disappear, and it was my husband who convinced me to start sending it to publishers.
So I'm really interested kind of in the structure, because it's quite a traditional structure of the book. You know, you have the 3 acts. There's the first act, which is the introduction to the characters, and then there's the pivotal event, and then there's the action builds very, very masterfully, and then there's a sort of another main action point towards the end of the book that pushes her into the resolution. So I was just curious as to how conscious you were of that particular structure when you were writing.
I didn't have an outline or anything like that. I had a goal of 700 words a day, and I sat down and made that goal no matter what. And I knew always what was going to happen next, but maybe not what was going to happen after that. So I would write a sentence of whatever the next scene was going to be, and write towards that. And then when I got there, I would think, what's going to happen next? And write that at the bottom of the page, and then write the novel towards that. And I just did that many, many times until I had a book.
Did you know how it was going to end? Did you know what you wanted for your main character?
I knew how it was going to end, the ending scene. I didn't know the twist until about halfway through. And then I went back through the book to make sure that the rest of it supported that.
Right. So did you have a lot of rewriting, or did you write? I mean, you've described it being quite incremental, but did you also have to go back and do a number of rewrites?
I don't remember very much, except until Torrey House, the press, got a hold of it, and they wanted me to change it to present tense. Because it was in past tense. So that was a fun change that took a long time and was very tedious, but was worth it. And I'm glad they gave me that feedback. I think it made the book stronger. But I'm a writer who tends to fall into the trap of revising so much that I stop writing. So I tried to, while I was actually in the middle of writing it, be pretty hands-off as far as going back to look. I would just read the beginning of whatever chapter I was on, and then start writing wherever I had stopped before.
So when you went back and read the whole thing, did you think like, oh, this is pretty good, or were you absolutely horrified?
Anytime I go back and read anything I write, I either think it's terrible or brilliant. So usually terrible. My husband, the white male, I ask him, because he's a writer too, and his first novel is coming out in October.
All right.
I ask him, like, he says, "Oh, I finished writing this chapter today," and I'm like, "How'd it go?" And he's always like, "It's great. It's really good." Like, I never feel like that when I finish writing. How about you? What's your process like?
I usually go through until the first draft, and then I read it, and I feel horrified and disheartened, and like I'm in a hole, and I don't know how I'm going to get out of, and it feels so distant from me, and it's a really panicky feeling. But the only thing is, now that this is my 4th book, I completely recognize that this is part of the process. But I definitely remember with my first book, just sitting on a rock and crying, because I thought, this is so awful. I've invested all of this time, and it's just terrible. But at least now I know that, like, okay, that's the process. And then you go back, and you find the bits within the book that you know work, and that feel really visceral and real. And I find that I focus on those and then kind of work out from them backwards and forwards, so that those powerful moments kind of connect a bit more. But my book is also quite heavily plotted, so that's also something that I have to spend quite a bit of time on getting right. So Chera and I spoke earlier, and it turns out that we both have love of local newspapers. So, and you said that you had spent a lot of time reading the local papers when you were living up here. And I wondered if there was a specific story that that sort of triggered this book for you.
The book actually was triggered by my neighbors here in Texas because we had new neighbors move in, and I was sick in my house, and I spend a lot of my time looking out the window. And we have horses, right? So these new neighbors moved in. Their house is like 6 times bigger than ours. It's a McMansion type kind of house, and we saw them. They would just come over our fence, climb over our fence, and mess with our horses all the time, which isn't cool because
That's
if
so
one of my
weird.
horses kicks them, they can sue me. So that was very stressful, not knowing how to handle that because we're very non-confrontational kind of people. And just watching them come over here and do whatever they wanted while I was watching alone from my window made me think a lot about the boundaries that we have and how we define them, and how you protect them or try to protect them. So that's where the spark for the book came from. And then that opening image of the rubies in the snow was something I don't know where I got. I carried it around with me for a long time and let it tumble around in my head until I knew how I wanted to use it. So I probably had that image in my head for several months. But as far as the newspapers, there are several things that happen in the book that I got from newspapers in Vermont. One of them was there's a park ranger who got hit on the head with a flashlight by a poacher and it killed him. There was a town that got divided, like it was a really close-knit town, and it got divided whenever an old quarry decided to reopen. I tried to pick, because I'm from Texas and I only got to visit Vermont. It was really important to me that I try to represent the area accurately, especially because I would like to move there someday. So I wanted to get actual local stories. And when I was there going to college, I talked to all the people I could and remembered things that they told me and tried to put those in the book, the concerns they had about people moving in from New York and stuff like that, and climate change and how it was affecting the weather there. So I tried to, because I'm an outsider, tried really hard to do credit to the area. And I hope that's successful.
I definitely think it is. I mean, both of our characters are people who kind of wash. I don't want to say wash up here, but they end up here in these very isolated situations. Your characters are sort of chosen a bit more by Rosie, but they then embrace this intense isolation, which particularly the Northeast Kingdom where I live is known for. And you know, I think it's really interesting when you have characters who choose to live in isolation, how you then have those characters develop, right? Because so much of the developing has to be kind of this internal arc with very little input from the outside. So I think as a writer, it's a real challenge. But I'm also really interested in these kind of outlier characters who want to live on the outskirts of society. We've had this amazing movie, which I hadn't seen yet, called Nomadland. But, you know, I think there's not enough characters in fiction about people who live on the fringes and who don't want to come into town, who don't, you know, want to be part of a book club, who literally make choices to sever themselves from society. And just by the nature of them being isolated, it's hard to write those characters. So why did you choose to write such an isolated character?
That's how I feel a lot of the time. I would be perfectly happy living where I couldn't see any sign of human civilization. But especially with illness being so isolating, it was really important to me to write a story with a character who had illness and figured out how to survive on her own, because that's something that keeps me up at night. So it was important for me to have her be detached and have to figure that out and grow. In case I'm ever in that situation myself, I think I wanted to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, it's because Rosie, my character, has a different kind of illness. She's recovering or suffered some terrible sexual abuse when she was a child, and hasn't figured out how it's affected her, mainly because nobody seems to have cared or noticed that this terrible thing has happened to her, and yet has overshadowed her life to such an extent that the choices, I don't really think she's made choices. I think she's just sort of defaulted, which I think is one of the things that abuse does. It takes away your choice and you're constantly reacting. So for her, it's the same thing, living in this isolated place and having to figure herself out. And then again, through that physicality of dealing with this remote place, actually be cured in a sense. Like, I mean, in both books, there's this theme of physical action and being in this hard northern environment are healing for these characters. So I think that I really connected to that in your book. So.
And in both books too, I think the characters for the bulk of the stories are reacting, and the real turn comes whenever they start acting and being less passive and more assertive in their own lives.
So certainly something that's come up with my book is that that idea of the passivity. You know, I don't go on Amazon. I've been just don't go on Amazon and read what people write. But I think in the beginning I accidentally did, and somebody was infuriated, as Samantha had said, you know, about her reaction to your book. Like, I don't understand why she did this and why did she do this, and there's somehow the passivity of characters is very difficult to write, because everybody wants, you know, we're also used to everything being action oriented, but people who are damaged, and particularly I think, you know, if you're writing about a certain kind of female character, there is this passivity that you have to deal with, and you have to make it engaging in a certain way that people recognize. And I know for me that was a huge challenge, was how to create this character who's enthralled to this really like idiot who gaslights all the time, how to make that believable, and how to make it that you wanted to follow this person who feels passive. And so I was just wondering about that struggle that you had, because my reaction was the same, although I think slightly different, because I recognize my own character in it. But, you know, for Anna to be initially quite passive, and then you worry about her, like if she's just going to keep being passive, you fear for what comes from that passivity.
We do have a question from the audience. I just put one in, but I'm going to read one that came in, if now might be a good time to hop in.
Oh yeah, I also needed to just quickly ask, somebody had asked earlier what page, so my reading was on page 158 to 159. Somebody had asked that earlier. So
okay, so that relates to the question that came in from Catherine, which says, for both of the scenes that you read, where she'd love to hear where they fall in the book. Do they come early or late? Do they show something about an evolution in the character's development, or are they early in the book and setting the scene for who they already are? So you kind of addressed that, Melanie. Yours is kind of a middle scene for Rosie that you read, the hunting.
Yeah, so it's very much in the middle of the book, and by this time, Rosie has really, this is a pivotal scene because you see her becoming active. So you've really switched from that passive person who has kind of believed everything that Bennett has been telling her. And by the time you reach this point in the book, she's become, you know, very physically strong, capable of taking care of herself, capable of taking care of her young daughter, and has formed a friendship with this local character, Billy. So for me, anyway, this is a pivotal scene, and I loved writing it because I felt Rosie's strength and her capability so much, and just knew that when I had written the scene that she was going to be okay, no matter what happened to her, she was actually going to be okay.
Mine came at the beginning of the book, so it was an introduction to Anna as she was whenever she felt her life was whole, before she experienced the major loss that came next.
What I love about that first scene is the stillness that you create between the two characters, between Anna and John. It's like they don't really need to talk to each other very much. There's just this very quiet way they have of being together, and there's certain phrases you lose, like, you know, we're not those kind of people, or, you know, you understand very clearly they're incredibly gentle people who almost can't bear the hardness of the world, which is why they've kind of chosen to live separately from it. So it very clearly established who they were, and in a sense why they'd come to live in this place.
Thank you. One thing I like about both of our books too is how we use animals, because neither one of us really have a bunch of characters in our books. I think maybe I have 6. So we really had to capitalize on it when we did have other human interaction. But we have characters who are mirrored in animals and the condition of the animals around them. And the animals in the books also show the characters' development, which is something I really liked about yours too. The animals had a special significance, even though the book was so intense and it didn't turn out well for the animals necessarily. I really appreciated that aspect of it.
Yeah, well, we had to talk earlier today, and we about our horses. So we really enjoyed sharing some of the stories about our various horse backgrounds and the horses who've come into our lives, and again the connection that I think when you keep livestock of any kind, outdoor livestock, I think it naturally connects you to the weather and the exterior world in a way that like cats and dogs just don't, because, you know, like I was asking Chera about what do you do with your horses in a hurricane or a tornado, and it's the same here. You know, there's some dreadful storms that we have here, and you have to go out in the storm, you know, and where are the horses? Are they okay? It's like it's this really visceral way of connecting to the land. So I think that even though you're living in Texas, in Oklahoma, that taking care of those large animals is, I think it would be the same if you were here. You just wouldn't have tornadoes. You just have, 6 feet of snow.
Right.
So.
But the snow comes straight down, right? Not sideways.
I don't know. Like we didn't get much of it this winter, but it can come anyway. We just didn't have any this year. It's gone. You got it down there in that part of the world, I think.
I remember when I was in college at Goddard, the first time I saw it snow in Vermont, I was like, this is so pretty. It's not hitting me in the face. It's just going straight down from the sky to the ground, because we always have 30 to 40 mile an hour wind just regularly. So everything goes sideways here.
So I'd love to invite more questions from the audience. Looks like here's one from Sally and Mike. How do you develop an ear or understanding of local Vermonters? Great question.
So that's a great question. And to be completely honest, for me anyway, it's something I struggle with. I have a friend down the road. He's an older gentleman. and he has this really broad Vermont accent. And so I would call him up and I would say, okay, Paul, how would you say this? And then I would write it down. But I think it's tricky because you want the accent to be authentic and not something that's poking fun, right? So I think that there's a difficult line that you must walk as a writer, because I have several other accents in the book. The upper wasp accent is I do as well, and so yeah. So I think just listening to it, but it's also what people talk about and the phrases that they use. So, and I wanted, particularly for my Billy character, I wanted her to just be so much of this place, and I wanted her to speak that language. But I do have the concern about appropriation, and will people think that I'm making fun of the local Vermont accent or local Vermont characters? I think those are things that as a writer you're and now more than ever just acutely aware of. Chera?
It was a little difficult for me because all of my experience in Vermont was, going to college there. My last semester, my husband and I drove from Texas. It was like 35 hours or something ridiculous. We were exhausted, but I got to have a car there. So we got to actually explore the state, which was fantastic. We got to ride Icelandic courses, trail riding, and we got to go to different towns and talk to different people. And I didn't have this book planned then, but I had everything that people were telling me I stored away. And I have Vermont friends that I met in college. So I still keep in touch with them. I didn't really use any accents. And funnily enough, the vernacular that I kind of use, the little bit that I have, is actually stuff we also say in Texas, because the people are weirdly similar in how friendly they are, and how open, and the rural aspect. So it felt like a better version of home when I was in Vermont, which is why I would like to move there. So it wasn't really a stretch in that direction for me. The only thing I really pulled from something was from Vermont Fish and Wildlife, or I think that's what it's called. I read their goal was to have a moose a square mile, and I put that in there because that's hilarious. But other than that, when I was there, I always, when I go to a place, try to pay attention to the people there and what they care about and what they're talking about and what matters to them. I feel like you get a better impression of a place doing that than going and looking at touristy kind of stuff.
I think that's where the newspaper comes in. I mean, I'm an obsessive reader of the Caledonia Record, and in fact, I wrote a short story about a moose that was a true story that happened here. They found this poor female moose that had been dragged up in Brownington, which is just north of here. And so what they think happened was these two kids saw the moose and shot it, even though it was out of season. She was just crossing the road and she had a calf. But then, of course, the idiots realized that a moose is a huge animal and they couldn't get it into the back of their truck. So they then tried to drag it, like 5 miles. And then apparently they just abandoned it because it was just, there was nothing left of it. And, it was like this story in the local paper and people were really upset, and there was like a reward offered. And, I was like, it's two dumb kids who just had a shotgun in the car. But the drama around that moment of those characters kind of getting involved in something that they didn't anticipate. I think it's fascinating. This is the closeness of society here too. There's really nowhere you can't hide. People know everything and everybody in these small towns. even though everybody's living in this isolated way, there's not a lot of privacy in a strange way. So
that's what I noticed about both of your books too, was that even in the isolation, there's still an element of the neighbor and everybody's in each other's business, in more surprising ways than what you would expect, which was kind of the fun, thriller aspect of the books. There is another question from Catherine. She's interested in what Chera said earlier about being asked to change the tense of the entire book. But I can't even imagine. That sounds really hard. She says, was that hard to accept, or did you immediately get why it needed to happen, and how did it improve the book?
Anne Terashima at Tory House was the editor who suggested that, and I love her. She's super nice, and so I was like, okay, I'll think about this. And she said, well, if you don't want to do it, we'll still take the book, of course, but just think about it. So I went ahead and did the first chapter, and it was so much more immediate and stronger that I was like, yeah, this is going to happen. Unfortunately, it's going to happen. So it took me a couple of weeks to go through and do that. And then there were still places we found in copy editing, the final editing round, where part of it was still in past tense, like I'd miss a verb here or there. So that worried me a lot. I was worried I missed a bunch of places, but I think it turned out okay. I haven't sat down and read the book anymore, because something that nobody tells you when you publish a book is that you read it so many times that you get sick of it. And I basically have it memorized. So please don't tell me if you come across any places like that. I don't want to know.
When I read things, I'm also an editor, and I always pick things up. I didn't pick anything up in the book. So
I didn't pick anything up.
I'm glad to hear that.
I mean, that project sounds just so huge. I can't even imagine undertaking that. I do love the immediacy of it. So it's nice to have that good editor that can just.
Yes, that was all Anne Terashima. She was brilliant.
That's amazing. I love it.
Yeah, I think it was definitely the right call, because it brings you so much into that character's present. And again, those are just random choices that you make when you start out writing a book. Like, am I going to write in the first person? Am I going to write in the third person? Am I going to write in the close third person? Like, how? And you have to maintain that the whole way through the book. You can't sort of veer into what another character is thinking when you're staying with your one character. So it's like a hugely important choice. But I think it's fabulous in the way it's written. I can't imagine it not being in that that present tense.
I'm gonna let Anne know you said that. She'll be thrilled.
I just 1 second. I've got a husband calling, and so can you just see? I'm just gonna mute me.
That's fine. I can ask a question that you can answer for your book, and then perhaps when Melanie comes back, she can answer. I'm curious about how both of you got your titles. So if you want to talk about the monarchs of the Northeast Kingdom and what that title, where did it come from and what it represents?
Well, the reason I picked the Northeast Kingdom was that it reminded me so much of where I live here. And so I thought I needed it to be here, but in a place that was colder and had more trees. So I hope that the similarities that I felt there would make it more authentic. So whenever I was writing it, I just had the file saved as Northeast Kingdom book. And then maybe about a third of the way through, the title came to me really quickly, and I was like, what would make this better is if I call it Monarchs of the Northeast Kingdom. And just the sound of the Northeast Kingdom is so lovely and grand, unlike the sound of my cats running around behind me. I'm really sorry. But yeah, once I had the title, I knew exactly what the rest was going to be. And it all started with seeing a weather report at the B&B for Northeast Kingdom. When I was going to college, I was like, what is that? That sounds amazing. I'm going to look that up. And that's what I found out the Northeast Kingdom was.
And do you see Anna and John as are they the monarchs of are they running their own monarchy out, out in the woods?
Yeah, that's the main meaning, I think, but I think it has a couple of levels.
Melanie, I asked just about titles. They're both such interesting titles, and I wondered if you can speak to where the hair came from as a title and what it means to you.
Um, well, the book's original title, the sort of working title, was The Giggle Man, who, of course, is Rosie's abuser. She calls him the Giggle Man. And I thought it was, really dark and catchy. And Eric, my amazing publisher, we're lucky we have these incredible publishers. He said, "Oh no, you cannot name the book after her abuser. You can't give him that kind of power over her." And I thought that was such an incredibly insightful and sensitive thing to say. So he was the one who suggested the hair, because the hair, of course, is a motif that carries throughout the book, both in an art, a piece of art, and a hair that Rosie herself discovers that's been shot under the porch of her house. So and the whole idea of the hare as being a prey animal that also has the ability to run at this, have these incredibly athletic moments of escape. So it was a great a great decision, and a deeply sensitive one.
That sounds like it. As much as the character of the Giggle Man and the memories I loved, I don't see that as a title either. I think people would get a different picture and think it was something else if it, and I like that the hair is more focused on Rosie and her character.
Yeah. Well, I think it's I love also that Eric's done the classic thing. There's the rose, the picture of the rose, but it's called the hair. So I think that makes it intriguing in
Yeah.
itself,
They're both gorgeous covers.
aren't they?
If you want to talk about the art, like where did the art for each of them come from? Did you get a say in the art for the covers too?
For monarchs, I had no idea what it was going to look like until they sent me the arcs, and I opened the box. I had sent the designer maybe 20 images of other covers that I liked, but this wasn't like any of them. But I loved it as soon as I opened the box. I think she did a great job.
Yeah, I mean, I can't complain at all about. I mean, I think this is the most. I love the color. I love the rose, and I love that it came out in January, which is just like the dullest, grayest, most hideous month. And then this book with this like a jewel arrives, and yeah, I mean, I think I never have any say, and I've had some terrible covers, particularly with bigger publishing houses that I've never had good experiences with. But this entire marketing team has come up with this cover, and then they present you with this cover and they go, oh, what do you think? Well, they don't care. They don't want your opinion at all. Like, they're not remotely interested in what you as the writer think. So I learned very, oh, it's great, even though I hated it. Like the gloaming was initially published in England, and it was called Shame, which I didn't like it being called Shame, but they said, no, we want to call it Shame. We think Shame is a great title, and they gave it this cover. And it so weirdly didn't sell. And then Eric from $2 Radio bought it here, gave it a different cover, called it The Gloaming, and it ended up doing really well. So, I think, yeah, you're lucky if you have a publisher who has a great sense of covers. But I don't trust the big publishing houses. I think that, at least my experience, has always been really, really negative. So
Yeah, well, there's an element of, books as art versus books as, capitalist commodity. And I think some of the small presses are really focusing on books as art. And so it's the writing, the literature that's art, and then it's the whole book, the cover, the design, the font, all of it makes it a really beautiful piece of artwork. And I love that. That's why I love to support small presses. I'm going to drop the book links for Bear Pond Books for these 2 books in our chat box for everyone to see again. I'd like to urge everyone to get their own copies of each of these books. They're fabulous. If there are more questions, we'll take them, but we are kind of wrapping up. I know everybody might have animals or children or partners vying for attention.
Husbands, yeah, right.
Yeah. The only reason nobody has come in here is because my child is hopefully asleep and my puppy is hopefully chewing on a deer antler. So everybody's happy. And I'm sorry if that's not something that Anna would like, would she? The chewing on a deer.
No, but
she'll be fine.
Rosie would be happy to do that. I just also wanted to add something, Samantha, to what you had said about indie presses. That I spent about a week calling over 200 indie bookstores across the country who were carrying my book, and had these amazing conversations with indie bookstores, because you're the ones who support indie presses like Tory and $2 Radio. And so many booksellers said to me, like, it's only indie publishers that are doing the really interesting work at the moment. So, thank you, Bear Pond Books,
Yes,
because
thank you.
without independent booksellers, we would have a really hard time getting our work out there. And it's like, a bookstore is such an amazing place. Like, only positive things ever happen in a bookstore. It's like a church, it's like you're only going to go in there and have a wonderful experience. So yeah, so thanks.
Catherine says, so true. Yeah, it really is. I mean, the bookstore is definitely my religion. Books. I mean, that's how I feel. And like I said, both of these books, if you are local, they're both on the staff picks table. So that's a nice place to find them. They'll be front and center, 15% off on the staff picks table, but they're so much fun. I really like them. I'm so glad everybody could join us.
Just quickly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Samantha, for organizing this.
Oh, of course. Thank you. And thank you, Kellogg-Hubbard Library. Poor Michelle from the library has her video has been broken tonight.
But I'm here and I've really enjoyed it. And it's the library's pleasure to work with Bear Pond Books and to have authors speak. So I'm delighted to be here, even if you can't see how delighted I am.
Our audience members are saying, thank you, authors. Really great to hear your discussion back and forth. Thanks, Samantha. Thanks, libraries. Sally and Mike say, I miss, I know the library is open for checkout, but I miss going in the library and just hanging out there and talking to librarians. They are doing email references. Like, I had to email the librarian today. I had to email Nick because I was like, I need a list of YA dystopias published in the past 3 to 5 years. Can you get me that? Like, on it, But normally I'd be in the library and I'd say, oh, I'm working on this, or I want to read this, what do you suggest? And they would just tell me recommendations, just like at the bookstore.
Yes.
And I miss that the library is not open for the in-person stuff yet, but soon.
Yes.
Soon.
Yep, it's all in the works.
Yeah. Gretchen says, thank you for your great books and interesting conversation tonight. Yeah.
Thank you all for being here.
Yes, thank you for coming out, or at least coming to the computer.
I loved it. I loved how I just knew when I read, I read The Hare, and then I had Chera's book on my shelf, and I looked at them and I said, I think both of these books are going to play off each other really well.
Yeah.
And it's not just because they were about the Northeast Kingdom, because they were like opposites in a way. Like you said, the characters, one's trying to save the animals, one's, hunting the animals, and but the play on that, it was really neat to hear both of your process and the books. So yeah, thank you for coming. Chera,
Thank you, Samantha.
You're welcome.